glucose is finding its way into the bladder, it is also attracting fluid, attracting water into the bladder. And before you know it, the person is passing excessive urine. That's on the side of polyuria. Then the other classical symptom is polydipsia, excessive thirst. Now, we said that when an individual accumulates glucose to the point that the accumulation exceeds the renal threshold, there is a driving in of glucose into the bladder and into the urine. And so there's with that the resultant effect of that is that there's a loss of fluid, loss of water in circulation, which will now trigger the test center, resulting in excessive thirst, and then the individual will keep taking water. But the unfortunate thing about it is that as the individual is taking water, the water is also following the glucose because the glucose is not still being controlled into the bladder, and so the excessive urination is sustained. The excessive thirst is also sustained. Then there's also a third leg of it, of the classical symptoms, which is the polyphagia. Polyphagia is excessive hunger. Now, despite the presence of high blood glucose in the body, the cells still cannot get energy available, particularly in a situation where glucose is not being driven into the cell. And so, because glucose is not being driven into the cell as a result of insulin resistance or resistance of the cell or refusal of the cell to respond to insulin, there is now lack of energy. Energy is not available because the glucose that is driven into the cell is supposed to be broken down at the end of the day to make energy available in the form of ATP. Because of the lack of availability of energy, because glucose is not being able to be driven into the cell, there is now a sense of weakness, unavailability of energy, which will now make the body to begin to feel like there is need for food to be consumed. And so the excessive hunger is triggered, and so the person begins to also eat excessively. So these are the three classical symptoms of um, diabetes mellitus. Now we look at other symptoms too that are associated with diabetes mellitus. They include unexplained weight loss. Now, you could say that why weight loss when there's enough sugar? Now the reason is because the body cannot use glucose available to it. So because glucose that is available is not useful to the body because it cannot be driven into the cell, what happens is that the body begin to look for alternative source of energy, and one of the sources of that energy is the stored lipids, which is the stored fat. And so, because of that, the fat that has been stored in the body is now being broken down in a process known as gluconeogenesis to break down lipid as alternative source of energy for the body. So, in the process of that breakdown of lipid as alternative source of energy, there is weight loss, and this is most commonly associated with type 1 diabetes. Now, other symptoms apart from unexplained weight loss include fatigue and weakness. Of course, fatigue, tiredness, and weakness. Now, this is also common in diabetic individuals because there's an unavailability of energy. So, where there's no energy, there's weakness and there's fatigue. Then, also, another symptom is blood vision. Now, this is as a result of accumulation of glucose that will attract, because of the accumulation of glucose, it will attract fluid to be gathered inside of the lens of the eye. And so with this one, the ability of the eyes and of the pupil to focus to bring a clear vision is impaired as a result of that accumulation of glucose, resulting in blood vision. Then another symptom is slow wound healing. Slow wound healing. For example, um, the ability for the body to be able to fight infection is impaired as a result of high accumulation of glucose, which has its negative impact on the immune system. that accumulation of glucose negatively impacts the immune system. So the immune system, in the presence of infectious agent, is not able to attack those infectious agents again because of a weakened immune system that is facilitated by accumulation in glucose. And so because of that, there is um, the weakened immune system affects the rate at which wound is healed, and also it predispose an individual to frequency of infections, maybe viral infection or bacterial infection or even skin infection. There's also another challenge that is associated, or another symptom that is associated with diabetes mellitus, which include tingling and numbness, particularly of the extremities, the fingers and the toes, the hands and the legs. Now, these ones occur as a result of damage to the nerves because of accumulation of glucose. Now, when glucose accumulate, they begin to deposit on the nerve, weakening the functioning of the nerves, and that one will affect the extremities. It will cause numbness and tingling of the extremities. And sometimes the diabetic individual begin to feel as if there are pins and needles are being used to choke his feet or to choke his or her hands. These are symptoms that are associated with diabetes mellitus. And then dryness and itching of the skin also is another symptom associated with diabetes mellitus as a result of dehydration. As a result of dehydration, remember that we said that as glucose is being drawn away into the bladder, fluid is also being drawn away, and that predisposes the individual to dehydration. And in dehydration, the person is begin to experience dryness and itching of the skin as well. Then another symptom include the darkening of the skin, and then presence of skin patches also on various sites of the body. For example, in insulin resistance, there is appearance of one of the symptoms you find in insulin resistance, particularly when it's chronic, is the appearance of dark patches in the body, particularly in the creases, for example, in the armpit, the neck, the groin, all those areas where you have foldings in the body, you begin to see dark patches in those areas, particularly if the diabetes mellitus is not put under proper control. So, with that, we can easily say that diabetes mellitus and it can be easily be identified with some of these symptoms as well. Then we in our next in the next video, which is following closely, we're going to be looking at the complications of diabetes mellitus, and we also look at the possibly the criteria for diagnosing diabetes mellitus.